When we started this series, or actually a couple of weeks before, I handed out some cards and I asked the church, what is your most common recurring negative thought? And those were some of the things that I wanted to address in helping us have our best summer ever. And so one of those things, one of these sort of themes that ran throughout those cards that got handed in was fear. I'm afraid I'm not a good enough parent. I'm afraid that I won't be as good as I used to be. I'm afraid that our money is running out. I'm afraid that my health is wearing thin. I'm afraid that I won't have enough money to pay for my health that's wearing out. We have all these fears, these things that cripple us. And fear really is crippling. It's debilitating. It can paralyze us and prevent us from moving forward. And we can see that in everyday life things. When I was younger, I used to work for an air conditioning company. And part of my job was to get on the roofs of like H-E-B, Walmart, these huge stores, and we would change out all of their air filters. And there was a time, it was the H-E-B at I-10 and Wurzbach. You guys know the one, I-10 and Wurzbach. I was on the roof of H-E-B at I-10 and Wurzbach. And these air conditioning, in your house, usually you have like one or two, maybe three little filters that you go in there. Well, on an H-E-B, there's like hundreds on the roof. And so you have these big air conditioning units. Some of them have like 4 filters, some have 6. And then there's these big giant ones that have like 40, 50, 60 air filters in them. The biggest one I ever had to work on had like 90 something. It's giant, these giant air conditioning units. And so the way it works is there's these slots and you just slide the air filters. So there may be these rows, big rows of air filters. So there might be like 5 filters in a row, and then there's like 9 rows that go like this all the way down. And so one time I was at that H-E-B and I'm changing these air filters. Well, the worst part about that job is actually the worst part is working on a roof in 110 degrees. But the other worst part is when a filter gets stuck in the back of one of these big giant air conditioners. So, it's tall, really big. The highest row of filters, are you guys picturing, am I describing this good enough? The highest row of filters is like up here. So the way we would do it, like my crew, we would always tape the filters together. So when you grab the first one, you can just pull the whole row out like this, okay? Well, that didn't always happen. So when you don't have that, you take a tape measure and then you just stretch it out. You grab the air filter, you know what I'm talking about, and you pull it out like this. Well, one time, I'm working on one of these big giant air conditioners. It took 45 air filters to go in this machine. On the very top row, a filter gets stuck in the very back. And now there's sort of 2 compartments. There's a big compartment here, and then there's a compartment with 2 rows of filters on top. It was the top row of filters in the very far back. This thing got stuck. And so I have my tape measure, and I'm trying to pull it out, and it's not coming. So finally, I come to the conclusion, the realization that I'm going to have to get up in there. So I climb up the side of this air conditioner, and I get in there, and it's like, it's little, it's like this. And I'm climbing back in there, and I get a hold of the air filter, and it's jammed in there, so I kind of jerk it out, and I get it. And suddenly, I see something moving out of the corner of my eye, and it's going like this. And there's not room in there. It's like this. It's right here. It's one of those big old giant yellow garden spiders. You guys know the ones? They're huge. I don't think they're like venomous, but I hear their bite could be like bee sting-ish. I don't like bee stings at all, and here's this thing, and it's next to my head. And I just like, so I'm sitting there like this, and I'm trying not to panic, because if I panic in there, I'm going to get all cut up. There's like shards of metal. There's sharp edges. And so I have this air filter, and I'm just like, I'm in this tube, this big, and I'm just like, just don't panic. And so finally I get out, and now I don't have this like huge fearophobia of spiders, but let's just say I'm not like thrilled to be the designated spider killer of the house. When I hear somebody go like, spider, that they're calling me. There's a spider in the house. That means, guess what? If you ever come over to my house and you see a cup sitting in the middle of the floor, don't move it. There's probably a spider in there, because that's how the rest of the family handles spiders. They go, boop, they'll put a cup over it. This morning, I got out of the shower, and in our bathroom, I saw a cup sitting in the middle of the floor, and I was like, oh, why? But that fear, and if you have a phobia, some people have phobias, it paralyzes you in that instant. And you panic. Total panic. These things that we fear in life can really paralyze us, prevent us from moving forward, prevent us from taking steps in life. And in life, we have things that we need to accomplish. We have goals. We have to deal with our finances. We have to deal with our relationships. We have to deal with parenting. We have to deal with our parents. We have to deal with our brothers and sisters and our friends. There's all these things in life that we have to deal with. And when we become afraid to move forward, it can paralyze us and prevent us from taking positive steps in those areas. Now, sometimes what we do here is we kind of add our Christian walk to the list. So it's like this: I need to take care of my finances. And maybe your Christian walk is up the top, like I got to do all the Christian things. Then I got to take care of my finances. Then I have to be a good parent. Then I have to, volunteer for the PTO. And then I have to do this. And then I have to do that. And Jesus becomes this thing on the list that really is adding to your fear. It's like this extra weight. I have to do all the things, because if I don't do all the things, then God's going to be mad at me. Jesus becomes this thing on the list. And if you're in that place where your walk with God and serving God and being a good Christian feels like it's just adding to the pressure, adding to the weight, and not helping your fear, here's the really good news: you're doing it wrong. I did it wrong for about 35 years. No kidding. Jesus delivers us from fear. We're not meant to live this way. We're not meant to go, well, here are all my Christian duties, check, check, check. Okay, I got that done. I need to go do my other things, parenting, bills, did this, went to church. We can really get a good grasp of the way God views fear in our lives by looking at this story about Jesus. Jesus and the disciples. We find this in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 40. This is Jesus calming the storm. It says this: As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." Now, first off, right away, this whole thing was Jesus' idea. Now, this doesn't happen, but if I knew everything that was about to happen and I had this plan, my feeling at that point, knowing everything that's about to come, there's this storm coming, and I'm going to save these guys, and I'm going to show them something awesome, I'd be like, hey, guys, let's get into the boat. Let's go to the other side. Like, this is going to be hilarious. This is going to be awesome. Get in the boat, guys. This is what Jesus is doing. He knows what's coming. He's not surprised by the storm that's about to whip up. And he goes, guys, get in the boat. Let's go to the other side. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats follow. Remember that. The other boats were following them. We're going to address that a little later. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Now, another thing to keep in mind is a lot of these disciples, these people that were traveling with Jesus, this was what they did. Like, boats were their thing. They were fishermen. They lived, they were raised, their job was on this lake. This storm was not normal. It was a regular occurrence for storms like this to whip up there, but it was not to the point to where, like, oh, hey, another storm. No, this storm was huge. And the reason storms whip up on the Sea of Galilee is because the Sea of Galilee is in a huge valley. So there's these huge cliffs, and they come down, and then the Sea of Galilee is there. And because of that, the way the wind comes, it just whips down in there, whips up these huge storms, and they come like that very, very suddenly. And that's what was happening there. And this storm was huge, so much that the waves were going over the side of the boat, sinking it, drenching it. One translation of the Bible says the boat was swamped. And of course, what is Jesus doing? Verse 38, Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. I like how they include that part, like, by the way, his head was on a cushion. It's not just like, hey, he was sleeping. Like, no, he was comfy back there. He was like, hey, is there a cushion around here, man? Let me take a little nap. Like, this was intentional. Hey, guys, get into the boat, knowing there's this storm about to come. I'm going to take a nap and let's see how you guys handle this. That's what Jesus was doing. I'm going to take a nap and we're going to see how you guys handle this. The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" Another thing to point out here. Teacher, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to drown? This was a rhetorical question. They weren't really asking Jesus, do you care? They weren't waiting for Jesus to go, oh, of course I care. This was a rhetorical question. They're going, Jesus, you don't even care we're dying and you don't care. It was a rhetorical question. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Not it slowly died down. It stopped, and it wasn't just calm. There was a great calm. Have you ever experienced that, like out on a lake, where, you know, like when the lake is like just glass out there? It's a great calm. It's like, wow. You guys know what I'm talking about? The total stillness. A great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" If I was in a storm, and I've been in a pretty bad storm on a boat, it's scary. If somebody said, "Why were you so afraid?" I'm like, because I was about to die. Our boat was sinking. Get this, that fear that they had was a perfectly valid fear. If you're in a sinking boat, is it not normal to be totally afraid? I mean, this is the stuff nightmares are made of. Your boat's sinking. One of my dad's close friends died out on a boat. People die. And Jesus is like, "Why were you so afraid?" We were about to die. Remember that. That fear that they had, nobody would blame you for being afraid when your boat is sinking. And now listen to this. The storm is calm. The danger is over. And listen to this. The disciples were absolutely terrified. The storm's done. The danger's over. Their boat's not sinking anymore. Jesus got up from his comfy little cushion. They're safe. And they were absolutely terrified. Why? Because they said, "Who is this man?" They asked each other. "Even the wind and waves obey him." Now, this fear, this being absolutely terrified, this was not this fear for their lives. This was not, oh man, Jesus is going to get us now. Right? So the storm's done. They know that Jesus loves them. They know that he cares for them. But for some reason, they described this feeling they had as absolutely terrified. And the reason they said that has to do with the question they asked. Who is this that the wind and waves obey him? Long before this happened, if you guys have heard of the emperor of the Persian Empire, Xerxes, he was a crazy person, and he was trying to take over the world. He had these armies, and they would march across lands and then go defeat other countries and take people over by force. One time, Xerxes and his army came up to a body of water, and he commanded his people, build a bridge. Nothing is stopping us. Build a bridge across this body of water. So they started to build a bridge across this body of water. And then a storm came and destroyed their bridge. Xerxes was so crazy, he had all of his engineers and workers killed because they failed. And then he had his men. Now, this puts you in this mindset. Then he had his men go out into the water and whip the water and stab the waves with hot irons to punish the water because it did not obey him. Now, why did the water not obey him? Because he's not God. Why did he think the water should obey him? Because he thought he was God. This is the type of thing I think the disciples were thinking. Here's this man, he's speaking to these waves, and they go, wait a second, who is this? Now, also keep in mind, they'd seen miracles already. Jesus had already done some stuff. These guys who were terrified in this moment actually left their jobs. Literally, they were working with fishing nets, and Jesus goes, hey, follow me. And they go, yeah, okay. I mean, there was some faith there. They'd seen some miracles already. And still they go, whoa, wait a minute. Who is this? If you read on, there was another time that they were in a storm without Jesus. That's when Jesus came walking on the water. Again, he calmed the storm, got into the boat, and it's really cool. The first storm they were in, they asked this question. It's calm. They asked the question, who is this? The next time Jesus calmed a storm, you know how the disciples responded? They said, oh, this is the Son of God. You see, Jesus was teaching them and showing them. He was growing their faith. They asked the question, who is this that the wind and waves obey him? The next time it happened, they go, oh, this is the Son of God. They were getting it. And these disciples were people who eventually had such faith that they gave their lives for the gospel of Christ. Gave their lives, faced death, denied Jesus, or we are crucifying you. And they said, no way. I'll never deny him. So we see these disciples go from this little bit of faith, and they grow and grow and grow to having just unfathomable faith. And see, what Jesus was showing them here is his nature. He was showing them who he was. Showing them, hey, you guys, I am God. This is the Son of God walking among you. They were learning his nature. And that's why I believe this is such a powerful story, is because it tells us a lot about the nature of God. So in the things that we face, we have so many different fears, so many different things that we come up against. The first thing to know is that God is not surprised by your problem. He's not surprised one bit. Just like he said, hey guys, let's get in the boat. He's taking you somewhere. He's taking you somewhere. He knows. And then I think about that question that they asked Jesus. They said, Jesus, don't you care? Have you ever asked a question like that to God? God, don't you care? God, let's be honest here. God, if you're so loving, why would you let me go through this? Or towards other people, God, if you're so loving and you're so good, why is this happening? We go, God, why? I've literally shaken my fist at God before and go, this is not okay. Here's the thing. God is not afraid of our questions. The problem that we have is not that we ask these questions. The problem that we have is that we ask them rhetorically, not expecting a response. You see, these questions that we have that come up inside of us that are brought about by these difficulties that we face. And we're going, God, don't you care? And if we will stop, expect an answer, and listen, what you are going to hear is that, yes, I care more than you can possibly imagine. He cares. He's there. He's with you. He's not surprised by your problem, by your storm. And understand what Jesus was showing these disciples in that storm is not that he was a little bit powerful to kind of calm the waves down. No, he brought a great calm. He showed that he has complete power. In your life, Jesus has complete power. To Jesus, the issue that the disciples were facing was not a storm. The storm was just a tool. The storm was like whatever. What Jesus was concerned with is their faith. And if he can use these little storms, these little difficulties in our lives, or big difficulties in our lives, to grow our faith in him, he knows it's worth it. We don't always feel that. Let's be honest. We don't always feel that, but he knows it. And what we see here in this story is there are really these two types of fear that we see. One is they were afraid of their circumstance. They were afraid of the storm. They were afraid of what was going to happen to them, much like the fear that we face in life. And then they were absolutely terrified because of the power of Jesus that they just witnessed. They were so in awe of him that the only way to describe their awe, like this is beyond being in awe, is that they were terrified. They were so in awe that they were terrified. It's kind of like, I remembered, I've been several places in the world, but one place was like going to the Swiss Alps. And I got to go up to the top of the Swiss Alps. And I remember standing on top of this giant mountain, and hundreds of feet below us, there was a cloud, and it was moving toward the mountain. And I'm like, what's it going to do when it runs into the mountain? The cloud hit the mountain and then started climbing up the mountain. Giant cloud hits the mountain, climbs up, it's coming right at me. And I'm just like, it comes at me, and it goes through me. And then I looked to the other side of the mountain, and you know what the cloud did? It came back and it went down, and it went right back to the same level that it started at. I was so in awe of nature in that moment that I might describe it as fear. Now, I wasn't afraid that I was going to die. I wasn't afraid that there was some sort of punishment coming on me. But the only way that I could describe that is fear. Beyond awe. What we see with the disciples is that the answer to their fear had to do with the fear of the Lord. So the fear that you face in life, approach it with the fear of the Lord. Now, this concept of the fear of the Lord is sometimes difficult to grasp. Because sometimes we think it has to do with like, man, I better be afraid because God's going to get me. I want to do away with that real quick. Look at Ephesians chapter 3, verse 12. Ephesians 3:12. Because of Christ and our faith in him, we can now come boldly and confidently into God's presence. If this is the only thing you get today, remember this. Because of Christ and our faith in him, we can now come boldly and confidently into God's presence. What that means is that the fear of God has nothing to do with God punishing you or getting you for the things that you've done. Why? Because of Jesus and faith in him. We are saved by the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ. And because of that, not because, notice it doesn't say, hey, because we've tried really hard to do the right things, or we've tried really hard, or because we read our Bible X amount of times, because we went to church so many times a month, because we did all these things. It has nothing to do with what you do. It has everything to do with faith in Jesus and what Jesus has done for you. Because of what Jesus has done, we can boldly approach God. You know what that does to me? That puts me in awe of God, who says, you can come into my presence boldly and confidently and with freedom because of what I've done for you. We don't have to come to God hiding our stuff. We don't have to hide our sin. We don't have to hide our fear. We don't have to hide anything coming into God's presence because his grace says, bring your junk. And you know what God's saying? He's, give it here. That's what he's saying about your fear. You can come to me with no fear. Boldly come. And that junk that you're carrying, give it here. You know, there's three sort of responses that I was thinking about to this message and fearing God. You know, one is people who just refuse to believe in Jesus. You're never going to convince somebody to fear the Lord if they don't believe, right? That would just make no sense to be afraid of something that you don't believe in. I mean, children maybe do that with like monsters under their bed or whatever, but we're adults. We're not afraid of things that we don't believe in. Even though sometimes when I go take out the garbage late at night, I run back in because I swear there's something behind me. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's just me, I don't know. But there are those that don't believe. You could try to convince them all you want to be afraid of God, but really, what's the thing? Why do we come to God with no fear, boldly? Because of Jesus and our faith in him. So if there's no faith there, what are they afraid of? And then there are those, this is where I would like to believe I am, who trust fully in Jesus. And because we trust in what Jesus has done, we have no reason to fear, be afraid of coming into God's presence. We can come boldly, confidently, even though we are 100% completely in awe to the point to where it's like, I am terrified. This is crazy. We can go boldly into his presence because of what Jesus has done. And here's the most dangerous place that we can just live, is where you believe in God, but you're trying to get close to God according to your own merit. to say, I can be good enough to where God says, now welcome. We come to God saying, God, look, this is how much money I gave. This is how much volunteering I did. I even told somebody at work about Jesus. I did all these things. What we're doing when we come to God in that way is we're saying, God, look what I've done. Accept me because I'm good enough according to my work. When we do that, we fail every time. Every time. This is how it went from the beginning of the world, is people coming to God saying, look how good we can be. The Israelites said, God, give us some laws so we can show you how good we are. They failed on day one. Literally, like the first law came. It's like, and God's like, hey, have no other gods before me. Moses goes up on the mountain. They're like, hey, guys, let's make a golden calf to worship. Fail. We cannot be perfect, but we can be made perfect because of Jesus and faith in him. 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. This should put to rest the idea that we have to fear punishment from God. There's no fear. How much fear in love? No fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment. Whoever fears has not been perfected in love. This word, perfected, in the Greek it's used a little bit differently than what we see it as. Because we could look at our lives and go, man, I still kind of have flaws. And go, man, I'm not perfect in love. That's not what we're talking about here. When John's writing this and he's saying, be perfected in love, what he's talking about, and even some versions of the Bible translations say, made complete in love. This word perfected, it's more like come to fruition, to be made complete. They would even do this with meals. Like when a meal was finally served, they would say, the meal is perfected. It's done. It's complete. And when we look to the complete work of the cross, knowing that it is finished, Jesus paid once for the sins of all time, and when you put your faith in him, that is what you receive. So with this idea, we can have these two motivations. Let's be honest. If your faith is in Jesus, you want to please God. You want to live a godly life. You want your life to be better. The question is, how do we do that? And the key to that is motivation. What is your motivation? Are we afraid that God's going to punish us? Or are we motivated by the love of God inside of us? I'll tell you real quick what's more productive. Fear works on a very temporary basis. Because quite honestly, we have sins that we face, and yeah, you know what? You might be too afraid to commit that sin the first time, but you overcome that fear, don't you? We overcome that fear. But when the love of God is perfected in you, complete in you, coming to fruition in you, that's a motivation that can be described as springs of living water. Now, real quick, when those disciples got in that boat, remember it said there were other boats that followed them. When God is working in your life, there are other boats watching you. Sometimes they're little boats watching you. One of the most powerful things that you can do in moving forward is simply trust in Jesus. Because when you can walk through scary moments, to where people go, this is a totally rational fear. This fear is rational. It makes sense to everybody. Nobody's going to blame you for being afraid. When you can walk through those things and go, Jesus has me, I will not fear. You are bringing that peace and proving that peace to those other boats. You're showing them. Your walk with God is meaningful not only to you, but to the other boats that are following. So this week, you're going to face moments of fear. Perhaps you have a fear that's in your head right now. Perhaps there's something that has been so overwhelming that it's been keeping you from being the person that you know God has called you to be. This debilitating fear. Find courage, find hope. Equip yourself with the gospel of Jesus. If God is for you and God is with you and God is in your boat, who can stand against you? You see, as we begin to trust, we begin to see God working, we experience the power and the love of God. We could call this the fear of the Lord. You can face every fear in life by starting with the fear of the Lord. When you grasp how big and awesome and powerful and loving God is, those obstacles seem to shrink. And let me tell you this. A lot of times we're looking to God to be the calmer of our storm. You know what He wants to be? He wants to be the calm in your storm. Those disciples' faith, Jesus said, hey, why are you so afraid? What He was trying to get them to understand is that, hey, even in the storm, know that I'm with you. Even if my head's on a cushion, I'm with you. He's not only the calmer of your storm, but He is the calm in your storm. Fear can hold us back. We can allow it to have power over us, but we do not have to. You don't have to be afraid in your health. You don't have to be afraid in your finances. You don't have to be afraid in your relationships. Because Jesus is with you. And if this is the summer that you overcome fear, this could be your best summer ever.